The space station's cantina fell silent when Marcus Kane walked through the airlock. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to lips, and even the automated serving droids seemed to pause in their movements. The human's presence filled the room like a cold wind, his scarred face expressionless as his dark eyes swept across the gathered aliens. Commander Zethkar of the Vorthon Empire watched from his corner booth as the legendary figure approached the bar. The reptilian officer had heard the stories, of course. Every military commander in 3 sectors had heard about the human who single-handedly dismantled the Kronex Syndicate's operations on Valdris Prime. The man who walked into a hegemony fortress with nothing but basic equipment and walked out with classified battle plans that changed the course of the Rim Wars. Kane's weathered hands rested on the bar's metal surface as he ordered something strong. The bartender, a nervous Quillen with trembling antenna, quickly complied without asking for payment. Nobody asked Marcus Kane for payment anymore. Not after what happened to those who tried. "You're a long way from human space," Zethkar said, sliding into the seat beside him. The human didn't acknowledge the comment, simply staring into his drink as if it held answers to questions nobody else could understand. "I go where the work takes me," Kane finally replied, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 dead stars. "And right now, the work is here." Zethkar had requested this meeting through intermediaries, offering a job that most would consider impossible. The hegemony had taken prisoners from a dozen different species during their latest expansion, holding them in a facility that orbital scans couldn't even locate. Intelligence suggested it was somewhere in the Kepler void, a region of space so dangerous that most ships wouldn't even attempt passage. "The facility exists," Zethkar began, placing a datapad on the bar. "Our people confirmed it 3 days ago before their ship was destroyed. The hegemony is conducting experiments on the prisoners. Biological weapons research, they believe." Kane's fingers drummed once against the bar's surface. In the silence that followed, other patrons began quietly filing out of the cantina. Word would spread quickly that the Ghost of Titan station was taking another job. Smart beings knew to clear the area when Marcus Kane went to work. "How many prisoners?" Kane asked. "Estimates suggest between 300 and 500. Mixed species. Some are military, others civilian refugees from border worlds." The human's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Civilians changed things. Kane had rules about civilians, though nobody fully understood the reason why. Some said it was because of what happened to his family. Others believed it stemmed from his military service before he went freelance. All anyone knew for certain was that jobs involving civilian casualties paid triple his usual rate. Payment? 2 million standard credits, half now, half upon successful extraction of any prisoners. Kane turned to look at the Vorthon commander directly for the first time. His eyes held depths that spoke of losses so profound they had fundamentally altered the man's relationship with existence itself. Zethkar had seen combat veterans before, had commanded troops who had witnessed terrible things, but Kane's gaze was different. It was the look of someone who had already died inside and was simply waiting for his body to catch up. 4 million, Kane said quietly. "All of it now." "That's double our agreed price." "The price changed when you mentioned children." Zethkar blinked in surprise. He hadn't mentioned children specifically, but Kane somehow knew they were among the prisoners. The human's reputation for gathering intelligence was almost supernatural. Some claimed he had contacts in every major organization across the galaxy. Others believed he possessed technology that could slice through any encryption or surveillance network. "How did you—" "Does it matter?" Kane stood, finishing his drink in one smooth motion. 4 million, or find someone else to die for your cause? The Vorthon commander considered his options. His government had authorized up to 5 million for this operation, but that was assuming they could hire an entire mercenary company. Kane worked alone, which seemed impossible given the scope of the mission. Yet his success rate spoke for itself. In 5 years of freelance operations, Marcus Kane had never failed to complete a contract. "Agreed," Zethkar said, initiating the credit transfer from his personal device. "When do you leave?" "I'm already gone." Kane walked toward the cantina's rear exit, his footsteps echoing in the now empty space. As the door slid shut behind him, Zethkar realized he had never seen the human's ship, never learned his current location, never even confirmed how Kane planned to reach the Kepler void alive. Yet somehow, the Vorthan commander knew those prisoners would be free within the week. The Ghost of Titan station had earned his nickname. Marcus Kane's ship hung in space like a predator waiting to strike. The vessel defied easy classification, too large to be a fighter, too heavily armed to be a transport, too advanced to have originated from any known shipyard. Its hull bore no markings, its configuration matched no database entries, and its energy signature was somehow both powerful and completely undetectable unless someone knew exactly what to look for. Kane sat in the pilot's chair, studying holographic displays that showed the Kepler void in 3 dimensions. The region was a navigational nightmare of collapsed stars, gravity wells, and radiation storms that could fry most electronic systems in seconds. Ship traffic through the area was virtually non-existent, making it perfect for hiding something the hegemony didn't want found. His fingers moved across control surfaces with practiced precision, inputting calculations that would have challenged a team of navigation specialists. Kane had learned to pilot in humanity's early expansion period, when ships were less automated and success depended more on skill than technology. Those lessons had served him well in a galaxy where most species relied too heavily on computer assistance. The ship's AI spoke in a neutral voice. "Course plotted for Kepler Void Entry Vector 7 Alpha. Estimated travel time, 43 hours. Accepted. Begin jump sequence." Space folded around the vessel as it entered hyperspace, carrying Kane toward whatever horrors the hegemony had created in their hidden facility. He used the travel time to study intelligence reports, prisoner manifests, and architectural scans of similar hegemony installations. Every detail mattered when planning an extraction from what amounted to an impregnable fortress. The hegemony favored pyramid-shaped structures for their detention facilities, with landing bays at the base and high security areas near the apex. Prisoners would likely be held in the middle levels, while research areas and command centers occupied the upper sections. Standard doctrine called for multiple shield generators, automated defense systems, and a garrison of at least 200 soldiers. Kane had stormed similar facilities before, but never alone, and never in a region where backup was impossible. This mission would require a different approach, something that played to humanity's unique advantages while exploiting the predictable weaknesses in hegemony tactics. The ship's sensors detected the edge of the Kepler void 18 hours ahead of schedule. Kane had pushed the hyperdrive beyond safe parameters, knowing that speed might matter more than caution. He dropped to sublight and immediately activated every stealth system the vessel possessed, becoming a ghost sliding through the cosmic graveyard. Dead stars hung in space like massive tombstones, their collapsed cores generating gravity fields strong enough to tear apart anything that wandered too close. Radiation storms crackled between them, creating spectacular light shows that doubled as navigation hazards. Kane threaded his way through the maze with an intuition that seemed to border on precognition. "Contact," the AI announced. "Artificial structure bearing 27 Mark 15. Range, 400,000 kilometers." Kane's displays filled with data as his sensors focused on the target. The hegemony facility was exactly what he had expected, a massive pyramid suspended in space between 2 dead stars, protected by energy shields and bristling with weapons. What he hadn't expected was its size. The structure was easily large enough to hold 5,000 prisoners, not the few hundred Zethkar had estimated. Scan for life signs. Multiple contacts detected. Estimate 700 to 900 individual biological signatures. Caution. Sensor resolution degraded by local radiation interference. Nearly 1,000 prisoners. The job had just become significantly more complicated. Kane studied the facility's configuration, noting the positioning of shield generators, weapon emplacements, and what appeared to be a massive antenna array pointed toward the galactic core. The hegemony wasn't just conducting experiments here. They were broadcasting the results somewhere. Kane's ship drifted closer, using the radiation storms as cover, while passive sensors gathered more detailed information. Guard patrols followed predictable patterns, shield rotations occurred every 6 hours, and supply ships arrived weekly through a specific corridor that avoided the worst gravitational anomalies. A plan began forming in Kane's mind, one that would require precise timing and a willingness to risk everything on a single gambit. He opened a secure channel and began recording a message that would be transmitted if he failed to check in within 72 hours. This is Marcus Kane. Freelance operative, current date standard galaxy time 1447.3. If you're receiving this message, I'm dead. The Hegemony facility in the Kepler Void is conducting biological weapons experiments on prisoners from at least dozen species. Coordinates and tactical data are attached. Someone needs to finish what I started. Kane sealed the message and set it to transmit to every major news network and military command in the galaxy. Then he began preparing for what would either be his greatest success or his final mission. The prisoners in that facility were counting on him, even though they didn't know he existed. In the silence of space, surrounded by the graves of dead stars, Marcus Kane began his approach. The galaxy's most dangerous force was about to remind the Hegemony why humans who had nothing left to lose were never to be underestimated. The facility's outer sensors never detected his approach. Marcus Kane had learned long ago that the galaxy's most sophisticated detection grids shared a common weakness. They were designed to spot known threats. His ship used technology that shouldn't exist, modifications that transformed a standard vessel into something unprecedented. Years of salvaging crashed alien ships had given Kane access to components that most engineers couldn't even identify. Cloaking devices from the extinct Phantom Fleet, sensor scramblers developed by the Paranoid Collective, and hull materials that absorbed rather than reflected scanning beams. The ship was a testament to human adaptability, taking the best from every species and combining it into something greater than the sum of its parts. Kane's hands moved over the controls with practiced efficiency as he initiated the first phase of his plan. The ship's external hull began shifting, panels sliding aside to reveal specialized equipment that would have been illegal in most sectors of the galaxy. Not that legality mattered to a man who had already lost everything the law was supposed to protect. 3 years ago, Marcus Kane had been a different person entirely. Captain Kane of the Colonial Defense Force, decorated veteran of the Outer Rim campaigns, devoted husband and father of 2. His family had lived on New Geneva, a peaceful agricultural world that supplied food to dozens of systems. The planet had been far from any conflict zones, protected by treaties and its strategic insignificance. The Hegemony changed all of that in a single day. Their attack had been swift and merciless, designed not to conquer but to send a message. Orbital bombardment turned thriving cities into glass craters. Biological weapons contaminated the water supplies. By the time rescue ships arrived, New Geneva was a dead world, its 20 million inhabitants reduced to scattered graves. Kane had been off-world when it happened, leading a routine patrol mission in a neighboring system. He returned to find his wife Sarah and children Emma and David listed among the casualties. No bodies to bury, no final words, nothing but names on an endless scroll of the dead. The Colonial Defense Force offered counseling, medical leave, and eventually an honorable discharge when it became clear that Kane could no longer function as a military officer. They meant well, but they couldn't understand that the man who had loved Sarah's laugh and taught David to throw a baseball had died along with his family. What remained was something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Kane's transformation into the galaxy's most feared freelance operative hadn't happened overnight. It began with small jobs, bodyguard work, corporate security, extracting diplomats from hostile territories. He was good at it, better than anyone expected. Humans had a reputation for being unpredictable, but Kane took that trait to new extremes. Where alien species relied on established protocols and predictable tactics, Kane improvised. Where others saw impossible odds, he found opportunity. His success rate became legendary, his methods became studied in military academies, and his fees became astronomical. But money had never been the point. Every mission was practice for this moment, the chance to strike directly at the hegemony's heart. Kane had spent 3 years gathering intelligence, making contacts, and building the reputation that would eventually lead him to jobs like the one Zethkar offered. Each successful operation brought him closer to the real target, the beings responsible for New Geneva's destruction. The facility ahead represented more than a rescue mission. It was a declaration of war. Kane's ship settled into a stable position behind a cluster of metallic asteroids, their mineral content providing additional cover from the pyramid's sensors. The human began activating systems that would have been impossible for any other pilot to manage simultaneously. Targeting computers came online, weapon systems armed themselves, and specialized equipment prepared for deployment. A normal military strike would require a fleet. A standard mercenary operation would need at least 20 soldiers and heavy support vessels. Kane planned to do it alone, using advantages that no alien species possessed. Humans were the galaxy's newest spacefaring race, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries ago. Most established species viewed them as primitive upstarts, useful for manual labor and cannon fodder but lacking the sophistication for serious military operations. That assumption had cost many enemies their lives. Humanity's relative youth in galactic affairs meant they weren't bound by the same tactical doctrines that shaped other species. Humans didn't have 10,000 years of military tradition teaching them what was and wasn't possible. They simply looked at a problem and found the most direct solution, regardless of whether it followed established protocols. Kane exemplified this approach. His plan for penetrating the hegemony facility would have been rejected by any alien commander as recklessly impossible. Which was exactly why it would work. The first phase required getting inside the facility's defensive perimeter without triggering alarms. Standard doctrine called for jamming communications, overwhelming defenses with firepower, or finding a weakness in the shield grid. Kane chose a different approach entirely. He was going to ask for permission to land. The ship's communication array activated, broadcasting on standard hegemony frequencies using codes that Kane had acquired through methods he preferred not to discuss. His message identified the vessel as a supply transport carrying biological specimens for the research division. Hegemony Station Omega-7, this is Transport Vessel Midnight Express, requesting docking clearance. We have urgent medical supplies for Dr. Krexenol's research team. The response came within minutes. Automated systems confirming his credentials and assigning a docking bay. Kane smiled grimly as the facility's shields opened to admit his ship. Sometimes the simplest approaches were the most effective. Docking Bay 12 was located near the pyramid's base, exactly where Kane wanted to begin his infiltration. His ship settled onto the landing platform with mechanical precision, while hidden cameras recorded everything for later analysis. Kane counted 18 security personnel in the immediate area, all armed but relaxed. They clearly weren't expecting trouble from a supply transport. Kane activated his personal equipment, checking weapons, explosives, and the specialized gear that would be essential for the mission ahead. His armor was lightweight but effective, designed for mobility rather than protection. Speed and surprise would keep him alive far better than heavy plating. The cargo bay opened with a soft hiss, releasing a cloud of refrigerated air that provided additional concealment. Kane emerged carrying a sealed container that supposedly held biological samples, but actually contained enough explosive charges to level half the docking bay. His appearance was calculated to be as unremarkable as possible, another human worker performing mundane duties. "Transport Midnight Express, reporting for delivery," Kane announced to the nearest hegemony officer, a tall insectoid creature whose species Kane didn't recognize. "You're early," the officer said, consulting a data pad. "Dr. Krexnall wasn't expecting specimens until tomorrow." "Emergency delivery. Something about a breakthrough in the weapon synthesis program." The officer's antenna twitched with interest. Research breakthroughs were rare enough to generate excitement even among the guards. He gestured toward a cargo lift that would take Kane deeper into the facility. "Proceed to research level 7. Dr. Krexnall will meet you there." Kane nodded and entered the lift, the sealed container still in his hands. As the doors closed, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 1 was complete. He was inside the galaxy's most secure research facility, armed with enough firepower to cause serious damage, and nobody suspected he was anything more than a delivery worker. The real mission was just beginning. Research Level 7 proved to be exactly what Kane had expected. Sterile corridors lined with laboratories where unspeakable experiments were conducted on unwilling subjects. Through reinforced windows, he glimpsed alien prisoners strapped to examination tables, while hegemony scientists tested the effects of various biological agents. Kane's jaw tightened as he passed one lab where a young alien child, no more than 10 years old in human terms, struggled weakly against restraints while a researcher injected something into her bloodstream. The scientist was taking notes on how quickly the substance took effect, clinically documenting her suffering for later analysis. The container in Kane's hands suddenly felt lighter. Whatever happened next, that lab was going to burn. Dr. Krexnall turned out to be a reptilian creature with calculating eyes and hands stained with chemicals that Kane preferred not to identify. The scientist emerged from a laboratory where screams had been echoing for the past 10 minutes, looking pleased with whatever progress he had made. "Ah, the specimens from the Outer Rim," Krexnall said, eyeing the container. "I trust they were kept properly refrigerated during transport?" "Temperature controlled throughout the journey," Kane confirmed. "Where would you like me to place them?" "Laboratory 4. We're beginning a new series of tests on respiratory system modification." Kane followed the doctor down a corridor lined with holding cells where prisoners awaited their turn in the laboratories. Most were unconscious, drugged into compliance, but a few watched his passage with eyes that held desperate hope. They recognized something in the human's bearing that their captors had missed, the controlled tension of a predator preparing to strike. Laboratory 4 contained equipment that Kane had seen in intelligence reports but never witnessed firsthand. Biological synthesis chambers where genetic material could be weaponized, atmospheric processors that could manufacture deadly gases, and analysis stations capable of determining the exact composition needed to kill specific species. The hegemony wasn't just experimenting with biological weapons. They were preparing for genocide on a galactic scale. Kane set the container down on a central examination table, his hands steady despite the rage building in his chest. Every piece of equipment in this room represented thousands of potential deaths, countless families that could suffer the same fate as New Geneva. "Fascinating," Krexnall murmured, activating the container's locking mechanism. "These specimens should provide excellent data for our atmospheric dispersion trials." The container opened with a soft hiss, revealing rows of crystalline vials filled with what appeared to be biological samples. Krexnall leaned forward eagerly, reaching for the nearest specimen. Kane's hand moved faster than the alien eye could follow, grabbing Krexnall's wrist and twisting until bones snapped. The scientist's scream of pain was cut short as Kane's other hand closed around his throat. "Where are the prisoners being held?" Kane asked quietly. Krexnall's eyes bulged as he struggled for breath. When Kane loosened his grip slightly, the alien gasped, Level 9 and 10, maximum security." "How many guards?" 50, maybe 60. "Please, I'm just a researcher." Kane's grip tightened again. "You're a butcher, but you're going to help me save those people." The doctor nodded frantically, and Kane released him. Krexnall collapsed to the floor, clutching his injured wrist while staring up at the human with newfound terror. Kane reached into the specimen container and removed one of the crystalline vials, revealing that it contained not biological samples, but military-grade explosives. "Here's what's going to happen," Kane said conversationally. "You're going to disable the security locks on levels 9 and 10. Then you're going to broadcast an evacuation order that draws the guards away from the prisoner sections. If you try to warn anyone or trigger any alarms, I'll detonate enough explosive to turn this entire level into a cloud of expanding gas." Krexnall stared at the vial in Kane's hand, understanding that the human wasn't bluffing. The explosive charge was real, the threat was credible, and his life depended on cooperation. I can access the security systems from here," the doctor stammered. "But the other researchers will know something's wrong if they see an evacuation order." "Then you better make it convincing," Kane replied, pulling out more explosive charges and beginning to attach them to critical equipment. "Suggest a reactor leak, structural failure, anything that would require immediate evacuation of research personnel." As Krexnall worked frantically at his computer terminal, Kane continued rigging the laboratory for destruction. Every piece of equipment would be vaporized when he triggered the charges, setting back the hegemony's biological weapons program by years. The facility's intercom system crackled to life as Krexnall transmitted his false emergency. "Attention all research personnel, this is Dr. Krexnall. We have detected critical system failures in the lower research levels. All personnel must evacuate to emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill." Kane watched through the laboratory windows as scientists and guards began moving toward designated evacuation points, leaving the prisoner sections temporarily unguarded. The plan was working perfectly. But Kane knew his window of opportunity would be measured in minutes rather than hours. He pulled a small device from his equipment belt and activated it, sending a signal to charges he had planted throughout the ship during his approach. The explosion would provide additional distraction while also eliminating evidence of how he had penetrated the facility's defenses. "Please," Krexnall whispered, "I've done everything you asked. Let me go." Kane looked down at the alien scientist, remembering the child he had seen strapped to an examination table, thinking of his own children who had died when biological weapons fell from hegemony ships. "You're free to go," Kane said finally. "Just remember, I know who you are now. If you continue this work anywhere in the galaxy, I'll find you." Krexnall fled from the laboratory without looking back, leaving Kane alone with enough explosives to level half the research section. The human checked his chronometer and activated a timing sequence that would detonate the charges in exactly 30 minutes. Time enough to reach the prisoners and begin the extraction. Time enough to remind the galaxy why humans who had lost everything were the most dangerous force in known space. Kane headed for the emergency stairwell, beginning his descent toward the levels where hundreds of innocent beings waited for a rescue they didn't know was coming. Level 9 stretched before Marcus Kane like a tomb carved from metal and despair. The emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly red glow, creating shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Kane moved through the corridors with predatory grace, his footsteps silent on the polished floor as he approached the first prisoner block. The security station stood abandoned, its monitors displaying feeds from dozens of cells where beings from across the galaxy sat or lay in various stages of physical and mental breakdown. Kane's enhanced vision picked out details that would have been invisible to most species. The way a Centauri female had torn strips from her uniform to bind wounds that weren't healing properly, how a group of Valdorian children huddled together for warmth in a cell designed to house half their number. Kane's fingers found the control interface, and his modified equipment began interfacing with the hegemony's security systems. What should have taken a team of expert hackers several hours was accomplished in minutes through a combination of alien technology and human intuition. The locks disengaged with barely audible clicks, opening cells throughout the entire level. The first prisoner to emerge was a Thrakari warrior whose species was renowned for their combat prowess. The alien's fur was matted with dried blood. His eyes held the hollow look of someone who had endured interrogation techniques designed to break minds rather than just extract information. He stared at Kane with suspicion, muscles tensing despite obvious weakness. "Who are you?" the Thrakari asked in accented standard. "Another hegemony trick?" Kane handed him a spare energy pistol from his equipment belt. "Someone who's going to get you out of here." "Can you fight?" The warrior's expression changed as he recognized the weapon's weight and configuration. Energy pistols were restricted technology, unavailable to civilians and carefully tracked by military organizations. Only someone with serious connections could have acquired them. "I can fight," the Thrakari confirmed, checking the weapon's charge level with practiced efficiency. "But there are too many of them. This facility has hundreds of guards." "Not anymore," Kane replied, helping an injured Quell female to her feet. "Most of the guards are dealing with emergency evacuations on the research levels. We have maybe 15 minutes before they realize it was a diversion." Other prisoners began emerging from their cells, a diverse collection of species representing dozens of worlds that had fallen victim to hegemony expansion. Kane distributed weapons and emergency medical supplies while quickly assessing each individual's condition and capabilities. A young human woman caught Kane's attention. She couldn't have been more than 25 standard years, but her eyes held the same hardness that Kane recognized in his own reflection. Her uniform bore the insignia of the Terran Colonial Marines, though it was torn and stained with evidence of brutal treatment. "Corporal Jessica Chen," she said, accepting an energy rifle. "2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. I've been here 3 months." Kane studied her face, noting the controlled way she held herself despite obvious injuries. "What did they want from you?" "Information about human tactical doctrines, our psychological profiles, how we respond to different stress scenarios." Chen's voice remained steady, but Kane could see the anger burning behind her professional demeanor. "They're trying to develop specific countermeasures for fighting human forces." The implications hit Kane immediately. The hegemony wasn't just conducting random experiments. They were preparing for a systematic campaign against humanity. The biological weapons, the psychological studies, even this facility's location in the Kepler void, everything pointed to a planned genocide that would make New Geneva look like a minor skirmish. "How many humans are being held here?" Kane asked. 43 on level 10, maybe 15 still alive." Chen's jaw tightened. "They didn't expect us to be so resistant to their interrogation methods. Most alien species break within days. Humans just get angrier." Kane nodded grimly. Human psychological resilience was one of the species' most noted traits, though few aliens understood the reason behind it. Humans had evolved on a world that actively tried to kill them, developing mental frameworks that could function under extreme stress. What broke other species often just made humans more determined. "Can you organize the prisoners into groups?" Kane asked. "Anyone who can fight? Anyone who needs medical attention? Anyone who can't move on their own?" Chen nodded and began moving through the crowd of freed prisoners, her military training evident in the way she quickly established order among panicked civilians. Kane turned his attention to the facility's computer systems, accessing prisoner manifests and facility layouts, while his explosives timer counted down toward 0. 27 minutes until the research levels turned into expanding plasma. The manifest confirmed Chen's estimates. 43 humans held on level 10, along with hundreds of other prisoners from various species. The facility's total population was nearly 800, far more than Kane could evacuate using conventional methods. He needed a different approach, something that would use human advantages to overcome impossible odds. Kane activated his comm unit and began broadcasting on emergency frequencies. "This is Marcus Kane broadcasting to any Allied vessels in the Kepler Void. I am currently inside Hegemony Research Facility Omega-7 conducting prisoner extraction. Facility will be compromised in 25 minutes. Request immediate evacuation support." Static answered him. The radiation storms that helped conceal the facility also blocked long-range communications. Kane had expected this, but it confirmed that any evacuation would have to rely on resources already available. The solution came to him as he studied the facility's construction diagrams. Hegemony architects favored redundant systems, including multiple evacuation pods scattered throughout each level. The pods were designed to carry facility personnel to safety during emergencies, but they could just as easily transport rescued prisoners. "Chen," Kane called, "I need you to locate evacuation pod stations on this level. There should be at least 6, probably near major intersection points." The Marine corporal nodded and began directing groups of prisoners toward different sections of the level. Kane continued accessing the facility's systems, overriding safety protocols that would normally prevent unauthorized pod launches. The first group of prisoners reached Evacuation Station Alpha within minutes. The station contained 12 pods, each capable of carrying 8 to 10 individuals depending on species size. Kane's modified equipment interfaced with the pod control systems, programming them with navigation coordinates that would take them to the nearest Allied space station. "Autopilot is engaged," Kane announced as the first pods launched. "The systems will take you to Torval Station. Once you arrive, contact Admiral Morrison's office and tell them Marcus Kane sent you." 96 prisoners launched in the first wave, clearing space for the next group. Kane moved efficiently through the level, activating additional pod stations while fighting off the growing certainty that time was running short. The facility's intercom crackled to life. "Attention all personnel. We have detected unauthorized access to prisoner containment systems. Security teams respond to levels 9 and 10 immediately. This is not a drill." Kane checked his chronometer. 18 minutes until the research levels exploded. The evacuation ruse had worked longer than expected, but now the facility's remaining guards would be converging on his location. "Chen, how many more prisoners on this level?" 42, she replied, helping an elderly Vorthon into an evacuation pod. "Plus us." Not enough time for another full evacuation cycle. Kane made a tactical decision that went against every military protocol he had ever learned. Instead of ensuring his own escape route, he headed for the stairwell that led to level 10. "Where are you going?" Chen demanded. "To get the rest of them," Kane replied. "Continue the evacuation. If I'm not back in 15 minutes, launch the remaining pods and get out of here." Chen grabbed his arm. "You can't handle level 10 alone. The security there is triple what we faced here." Kane looked down at her hand, then back at her face. "I'm human. We don't leave people behind." The stairwell to level 10 was a vertical tunnel that descended into darkness, punctuated by security checkpoints every few meters. Kane moved quickly but carefully, disabling automated sensors and bypassing electronic locks with equipment that combined human engineering with alien technology in ways that neither species could have achieved alone. Level 10 proved to be everything Chen had warned about. The corridor leading from the stairwell was guarded by automated weapon systems that tracked movement with mechanical precision. Beyond them, Kane could see reinforced blast doors that would require military-grade explosives to breach. Normal tactics would call for heavy weapons, specialized equipment, and a team of at least 20 soldiers. Kane had none of those advantages, but he had something more valuable, the ability to think like a human in a galaxy that expected him to act like everyone else. Instead of trying to fight through the defenses, Kane began removing wall panels and accessing the facility's maintenance systems. Hegemony construction relied heavily on automated repair systems that could service equipment in areas too dangerous for biological personnel. The maintenance tunnels were too small for most species, but perfectly sized for human infiltration. Kane crawled through the maintenance network like a ghost, following power conduits and ventilation shafts that led directly into the high-security areas. His enhanced hearing picked up conversations between guards, automated system status reports, and most importantly, the location of the human prisoners. They were being held in a specially modified section designed specifically for psychological experimentation. Kane could hear fragments of the interrogation sessions through the ventilation system, voices asking questions about human military doctrine, pain tolerance, and what the interrogators called pack loyalty behaviors. The hegemony had identified humanity's greatest strength and were systematically trying to understand it. Humans didn't just fight for themselves or their immediate families. They fought for abstract concepts like justice, freedom, and the protection of strangers. It was a psychological trait that most alien species found incomprehensible, making it both humanity's greatest weapon and their most exploited vulnerability. Kane reached a maintenance access point directly above the prisoner section and began cutting through the metal grating with a plasma torch. The work was slow and delicate. Too much noise would alert the guards, while any mistake could injure the prisoners below. Through the gaps in the grating, Kane could see the human prisoners. Chen had been right about their condition. Many showed signs of severe maltreatment, but their eyes still held the defiant spark that made humans so difficult for aliens to understand. Even broken and tortured, they refused to surrender completely. One prisoner was Sergeant Major Patricia Walsh, a career soldier whose personnel file Kane had memorized during his military service. She was strapped to an examination chair while a hegemony researcher attempted to catalog her responses to various stress stimuli. Despite obvious pain, Walsh continued to meet her interrogator's gaze with undisguised hatred. Human subjects demonstrate unusual resistance to psychological manipulation, the researcher was saying to a recording device. Even when facing certain death, they maintain aggressive postures toward authority figures. This suggests fundamental differences in neurological architecture that may require alternative approaches. Kane finished cutting through the grating and dropped silently into the chamber. The researcher never heard him coming, never saw the knife that ended his life with surgical precision. Kane quickly moved to free Walsh from her restraints, noting that the sergeant major was weak but still coherent. "Who the hell are you?" Walsh asked as the restraints fell away. "Marcus Kane. I'm here to get you out." Walsh's eyes widened with recognition. "The ghost of Titan Station? I thought you were a myth." "Only on weekdays," Kane replied, helping her to stand. "Can you move?" "I can fight." Kane handed her a weapon and began moving through the prisoner section, freeing humans while eliminating guards with efficient brutality. Each liberated prisoner received a weapon and instructions to cover the group, while Kane continued the systematic rescue. The human prisoners moved with military precision despite their weakened condition, instinctively forming defensive positions and covering each other's movements. It was exactly the kind of behavior that frustrated alien commanders. Humans turned any group into an improvised military unit almost automatically. "Sir," one of the prisoners reported, We've got incoming hostiles. Sounds like a full security response team. Kane checked his chronometer. 8 minutes until the explosions above. Time for desperate measures. Everyone who can move, head for the evacuation pods, Kane ordered. I'll buy you time. Negative, Walsh said firmly. We're not leaving you behind. Kane turned to face the assembled prisoners. 37 humans who had endured torture, experimentation, and horrors that would have broken most alien species. They were wounded, outnumbered, and trapped in an enemy facility. By any rational calculation, they should have been focused entirely on escape. Instead, they were preparing to fight beside a stranger because he had risked his life to save them. It was the most human thing Kane had witnessed since New Geneva, and it reminded him why his species was worth fighting for. Fine, Kane said. We do this together, but we do it my way. The security team arrived in force. 40 hegemony soldiers in full battle armor, armed with military-grade weapons and confident in their overwhelming numerical advantage. They had fought human forces before and knew to expect fierce resistance, but they weren't prepared for what they actually encountered. Kane had positioned his people to exploit every human advantage. Their smaller size allowed them to use cover that larger species couldn't access. Their pack mentality meant they instinctively coordinated without verbal communication. Most importantly, their psychological makeup meant they fought harder when protecting others than when defending themselves. The battle was short, vicious, and completely one-sided. The hegemony soldiers had expected to face desperate prisoners trying to escape. Instead, they walked into a killing zone created by humans who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. When the shooting stopped, all 40 enemy soldiers were dead. 3 humans had been wounded, but none killed. Kane looked at his chronometer and realized they had 4 minutes to reach the evacuation pods before the facility's upper levels turned into radioactive slag. Move, he shouted, leading the group toward the nearest pod station. They reached the evacuation pods with 90 seconds to spare. Kane quickly programmed the navigation systems while the prisoners packed themselves into the available space. 37 humans in pods designed for 24, but they made it work through human adaptability and determination. What about you? Walsh asked as the pod doors began sealing. Kane stepped back from the loading platform. Someone needs to make sure the evidence is destroyed. Kane, don't... The pod doors sealed and launched, carrying the rescued prisoners toward safety. Kane watched them disappear into space, then turned his attention to the facility's critical systems. The research levels would explode in 45 seconds, but that wouldn't be enough to destroy the data stores on level 10. Kane began setting additional charges while the facility's superstructure groaned around him. The first explosions from above had already begun, sending shockwaves through the pyramid's framework. Kane had perhaps 30 seconds before the blast effects reached his location. He finished placing the charges and activated their timers, then sprinted toward the nearest airlock. His ship was still docked at Bay 12, assuming the facility's destruction hadn't damaged it beyond repair. Kane reached the airlock just as the charges on level 10 detonated, turning the entire prisoner section into a cloud of superheated plasma. The facility began breaking apart around him, massive structural beams failing as the pyramid's integrity collapsed. He launched himself into space just as Bay 12 exploded, his ship nowhere to be seen. Kane tumbled in the vacuum, protected only by his armor's life support systems, watching as the hegemony facility tore itself apart in a spectacular display of destruction. His ship materialized from behind a cluster of asteroids. Autopilot engaged, docking bay open and ready for recovery. Kane had programmed the vessel to wait at a safe distance until his emergency beacon activated, then retrieve him automatically. As Kane pulled himself aboard, he could see evacuation pods scattered throughout the nearby space. Over 400 rescued prisoners heading toward Allied territory. The facility that had been the hegemony's most secure research installation was now nothing but expanding debris. The mission was complete, but Kane knew it was only the beginning. The hegemony's plans for humanity were larger than one facility, more comprehensive than single operation could address. They had declared war on his species, and Marcus Kane intended to make sure they understood what that meant. In the silence of space, surrounded by the wreckage of his enemy's ambitions, the galaxy's most dangerous force began planning his next move. 6 months after the destruction of research facility Omega-7, the galaxy had changed. The rescued prisoners' testimonies about hegemony biological weapons programs sparked outrage across dozens of star systems. Military alliances that had remained neutral for centuries suddenly found themselves choosing sides. Trade routes shifted, defensive pacts were signed, and weapons shipments began flowing to previously ignored border worlds. Marcus Kane watched these developments from his ship's observation deck while drifting in the shadow of a dead moon. Intelligence reports scrolled across multiple displays, painting a picture of galactic politics in upheaval. The hegemony had responded to the facility's destruction by accelerating their expansion timeline, launching simultaneous attacks on 6 human colonies while their propaganda machine claimed the raids were retaliation for terrorist activities. Kane knew better. The pattern of attacks, the species-specific biological agents, the targeting of civilian populations, everything confirmed what the rescued Marine Corporal Chen had told him. The hegemony was implementing a systematic plan to eliminate humanity from the galaxy, using Kane's rescue operation as justification for actions they had already planned to take. The irony wasn't lost on him. By saving 800 prisoners, he had triggered a war that would claim millions of lives. But Kane had learned long ago that inaction in the face of evil was simply another form of complicity. The hegemony would have proceeded with their genocide regardless. At least now the galaxy knew what was coming. His ship's communication array chimed with an incoming transmission on a frequency that only 3 people in the galaxy knew existed. Kane accepted the call, and Admiral Sarah Morrison's face appeared on his primary display. The woman looked as if she had aged 10 years in the past 6 months, her uniform bearing new decorations that spoke of desperate battles and Pyrrhic victories. "Kane," she said without preamble, "we need to talk." Kane had served under Morrison during his military career, before New Geneva, before everything changed. She was one of the few people who still treated him like the man he had been rather than the weapon he had become. "Admiral," Kane replied, "I assume this isn't a social call." "The hegemony has taken Kepler Station," Morrison said bluntly. 4,000 civilian workers, plus a full garrison of colonial Marines. Intelligence suggests they're being transferred to a new facility for continued experimentation. Kane's hands tightened into fists. Kepler Station was humanity's primary research outpost in the sector, responsible for developing defensive technologies that helped protect human colonies from alien aggression. Its capture represented both a strategic loss and a humanitarian catastrophe. Where are they being taken? That's the problem. We don't know. The hegemony has built something in the Andromeda sector, a mobile command facility that can jump between star systems. They call it the Judgment Sphere, and our intelligence suggests it's the central coordination point for their anti-human operations. Morrison paused, and Kane could see the weight of command in her expression. "Marcus, this thing isn't just a military installation. It's the size of a small moon, armed with weapons that can sterilize entire planets from light years away. If they complete their research using the Kepler prisoners..." Kane nodded grimly. "The hegemony would be able to deploy biological weapons specifically designed to target human physiology, spreading them through atmospheric processors or water supplies with devastating efficiency. Every human world would become as dead as New Geneva." "What do you need from me?" "Nothing," Morrison said firmly. This is beyond what any one person can handle, even you. We're assembling a fleet. Every allied ship we can gather, plus volunteers from neutral systems. It'll be the largest military operation in galactic history. Kane studied the tactical displays his ship had been monitoring. Fleet movements, supply convoys, and communication intercepts painted a picture of massive military preparation. Both sides were gathering forces for a confrontation that would determine the balance of power in the galaxy. "How long do I have?" Morrison's expression didn't change, but Kane could see the resignation in her eyes. She had known he would ask that question, had probably hoped he wouldn't. "The fleet won't be ready for 3 weeks. The hegemony could complete their weapon synthesis in half that time." Kane leaned back in his chair, considering the mathematics of the impossible. A mobile fortress the size of a moon, defended by the hegemony's most advanced military technology, holding 4,000 prisoners who would die if he failed. Against that, 1 human, 1 ship, and a collection of alien artifacts that most engineers would consider experimental at best. "Send me everything you have on the Judgment Sphere," Kane said finally. "Fleet movements, defensive configurations, internal layouts if you have them." "Kane, you can't. Admiral, with respect, you've never been able to tell me what I can't do." Morrison stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "The data is already transmitting. Marcus, whatever you're planning, remember that some fights can't be won alone." "Then it's lucky I won't be fighting alone." Kane ended the transmission and began reviewing the intelligence files that were flooding his ship's computer systems. The Judgment Sphere was indeed the size of a small moon, constructed from materials that made it nearly impervious to conventional weapons. Its defensive systems included energy shields that could withstand sustained bombardment from an entire fleet, plus automated weapon platforms that covered every approach vector. More troubling were the reports about the sphere's primary weapon system, something called a Genesis array that could reshape matter at the molecular level across planetary distances. The hegemony claimed it was designed for terraforming operations, but the tactical applications were obvious. Any world within the sphere's range could be transformed into whatever the hegemony desired, including sterile wasteland. Kane's ship began plotting courses to the Andromeda sector while he studied the sphere's construction specifications. Somewhere in that massive structure, 4,000 humans were being subjected to the same horrors he had witnessed at Facility Omega-7. Every minute he delayed meant more suffering, more data for the hegemony's genocide project. But attacking the sphere directly would be suicide, even for Kane. He needed a different approach, something that exploited human advantages while avoiding the sphere's overwhelming firepower. The answer came to him as he studied reports about the sphere's resource requirements. A facility that size consumed enormous amounts of energy, materials, and personnel. It couldn't operate independently. It needed supply lines, support vessels, and regular communication with hegemony command structures. Kane couldn't attack the sphere directly, but he could strangle it slowly. The first target was a supply convoy carrying biological research materials to the sphere's laboratories. Kane intercepted the ships at a jump point 3 systems away from their destination, using his vessel's advanced stealth capabilities to approach undetected. The convoy consisted of 12 transport vessels escorted by 6 military cruisers. Under normal circumstances, attacking such a force would require a squadron of Allied warships and careful tactical coordination. Kane accomplished it in 18 minutes, using weapons that combined human engineering with technology scavenged from a dozen alien species. The escort ships were eliminated first, their shields overwhelmed by energy patterns that their defensive systems weren't designed to recognize. The transport vessels surrendered without firing a shot, their crews unwilling to die protecting cargo when their military escorts had been destroyed so easily. Kane transferred the research materials to his own ship, then sent the convoy's personnel toward Allied space in emergency life pods. The supplies would have been used to develop new biological weapons. Instead, they would be studied by human scientists looking for defensive countermeasures. The second target was a communication relay that coordinated sphere operations across the sector. Kane destroyed it using a technique that Admiral Morrison would have recognized from his military service: precision demolition that left the facility intact but completely non-functional. By the time hegemony forces responded to the relay's destruction, Kane was already moving toward his third objective. He continued this pattern for 8 days, striking at targets that supported the sphere's operations while avoiding direct confrontation with its defensive systems. The cumulative effect was devastating. The Judgment Sphere found itself operating with reduced supplies, compromised communications, and growing uncertainty about the threat it faced. Hegemony commanders began requesting additional escort vessels, implementing new security protocols, and generally acting like an organization under siege. Kane's real target was their psychology. The hegemony had built their strategy around overwhelming force and technological superiority. They understood how to fight fleets and armies, but they had no doctrine for dealing with a single opponent who struck without warning and disappeared before retaliation was possible. On the 9th day, Kane received an unexpected communication from the sphere itself. The message came through channels that shouldn't have existed, using encryption codes that were supposedly unbreakable. When Kane decoded it, he found a recording from someone he recognized: Sergeant Major Patricia Walsh, the soldier he had rescued from Level 10. "Kane," Walsh's voice said, though the image was too distorted to show details. "Don't know if you'll get this, but we've been working on something. The prisoners here, we've been sabotaging their research from the inside. Whatever you're planning, we'll be ready to help when the time comes." The message contained additional data: facility layouts, guard rotations, and most importantly, information about the sphere's power systems. The hegemony had made a critical design error in their pursuit of overwhelming capability. The Genesis array required so much energy that it drew power from every other system on the sphere during firing sequences. For approximately 90 seconds during each weapon's discharge, the sphere's shields and defensive systems operated at minimal capacity. Kane studied the technical specifications with growing excitement. 90 seconds wasn't long, but it might be enough. The sphere was scheduled to conduct a weapons test in 3 days, using an uninhabited planet to demonstrate the Genesis array's terraforming capabilities. Kane could use that window to penetrate the facility's defenses and begin extracting prisoners. But he would need to be inside the sphere when the weapons test began, which meant somehow getting past defenses that could destroy entire fleets. Kane spent 2 days studying the problem before finding his answer in the most obvious place possible. He was going to hide inside a supply shipment. The plan required modifications to his ship that pushed its systems beyond any reasonable safety margin. Kane reconfigured the vessel's hull to mimic a standard hegemony transport, installed fake cargo bays filled with legitimate research materials, and programmed his ship's computer to broadcast the proper identification codes. Getting the codes had required infiltrating a hegemony supply depot, stealing classified information, and eliminating an entire security team. Just another day's work for the galaxy's most wanted man. Kane's ship approached the Judgment Sphere as part of a routine supply convoy, one transport among dozens carrying materials for ongoing research projects. His vessel passed through 3 security checkpoints without incident, its false identification accepted by automated systems that had never been designed to detect a ship of Kane's unique configuration. The sphere's interior was a maze of corridors, research facilities, and detention areas that stretched across hundreds of levels. Kane navigated using the intelligence provided by Walsh and her fellow prisoners, moving through maintenance tunnels and service areas that were too small for most hegemony personnel. He found the first group of prisoners in Research Section Gamma. where they were being subjected to psychological stress tests designed to measure human emotional responses to various stimuli. Kane eliminated the research team and freed 37 civilians, providing them with weapons and instructions to reach designated evacuation points. The pattern repeated throughout the sphere. Kane would infiltrate a research area, eliminate the hegemony personnel, free the prisoners, and move on to the next target. Each group of liberated humans became another part of his growing insurgency within the sphere's hull. By the time hegemony security forces realized they had been infiltrated, Kane had freed over 600 prisoners and turned them into an army. The humans moved through the sphere's corridors like a plague, sabotaging systems, freeing additional prisoners, and generally creating chaos that hegemony commanders couldn't effectively counter. The weapon test was scheduled to begin in 4 hours. Kane needed to reach the sphere's command center and disable the Genesis array before it could complete its firing sequence. According to the technical specifications Walsh had provided, the weapon's activation would require the personal authorization of Supreme Commander Vex Thai, the hegemony's highest military authority. Kane found Vex Thai in the command center, surrounded by his senior staff and protected by the sphere's most elite guards. The alien commander was a massive creature whose species Kane didn't recognize, with multiple arms that moved independently and eyes that seemed to track different targets simultaneously. "Ah, the famous Marcus Kane," Vex Thai said, as Kane entered the command center with his weapons drawn. "I've been looking forward to meeting the terrorist who has caused us so much trouble." Kane looked around the command center, noting the positions of guards, the locations of critical control systems, and the massive display showing the Genesis array's charging sequence, 3 hours and 47 minutes until the weapon reached full power. "I've been looking forward to meeting the butcher who ordered the destruction of New Geneva," Kane replied. Vex Thai's multiple eyes focused on Kane with interest. "Ah, yes, the agricultural world. That operation was quite successful. We eliminated 20 million humans and tested our biological weapons under optimal conditions. Very educational." Kane's finger tightened on his weapon's trigger, but he forced himself to remain calm. Losing control now would doom the prisoners and ensure the Genesis array's completion. "Why humans?" Kane asked. "There are hundreds of species in the galaxy. What makes us special?" Vex Thai gestured with 2 of his arms toward displays showing human psychological profiles. "Your species is unique in its inability to accept defeat. Other races surrender when faced with overwhelming odds, negotiate when destruction seems certain, adapt to new circumstances. Humans simply become more dangerous." The alien commander paused, studying Kane with what might have been professional admiration. "You exemplify this perfectly. Most beings would have fled after losing their families, sought safety in distant systems, perhaps lobbied for political action against those responsible. Instead, you transformed yourself into the galaxy's most effective military asset and declared war on the entire hegemony." Kane nodded slowly. "So you decided to eliminate us before we could become a problem." "We decided to eliminate you because you were already a problem," Vex Thai corrected. "Human colonies serve as rallying points for resistance movements. Your military doctrines inspire other species to fight more effectively. Your psychological resilience makes occupation nearly impossible. You represent an evolutionary threat to galactic stability." The Genesis array's charging sequence reached 70%. In approximately 90 minutes, the weapon would be ready to fire. Kane could see the target planet on the main display, a barren world that would be transformed into something capable of supporting hegemony life forms. "Interesting conversation," Kane said, "but I'm here to shut down your weapon and rescue my people." Vex Thai's laugh was a sound like grinding metal. "One human against an entire command center? I had expected better tactical thinking from someone of your reputation." Kane smiled for the first time in months. "Who said I was alone?" The command center's blast doors exploded inward as liberated prisoners stormed the facility from 6 different directions. Humans armed with stolen hegemony weapons engaged the elite guards in close combat, while Kane moved directly toward the Genesis Array's control systems. The battle was fierce but brief. Human aggression combined with desperation proved more effective than hegemony training and superior equipment. Within minutes, Kane had reached the weapon controls while his allies secured the command center. "Shut it down," Kane ordered, pressing his weapon against Vexthai's head. "Even if I wanted to, the process cannot be stopped once it reaches this stage," the alien commander replied. "The Genesis Array will fire in 87 minutes regardless of any commands I might give." Kane studied the control systems, noting the countdown timer that continued its inexorable progress toward 0. Vexthai was telling the truth. The weapon's firing sequence was automated and irreversible once it passed a certain threshold. But Kane hadn't come this far to accept defeat. He began modifying the targeting controls, using techniques he had learned during his military service, combined with intuitive understanding of alien technology. "What are you doing?" Vexthai demanded. Kane continued working while freed prisoners secured the command center and began evacuating additional personnel from other areas of the sphere. His modifications to the targeting system were subtle but critical. Instead of aiming at the designated test planet, the Genesis Array would target the Judgment Sphere itself. "I'm ending this war," Kane said quietly. The alien commander's eyes widened as he understood what Kane was attempting. "You'll destroy the entire sphere. Everyone aboard will die, including your precious humans." Kane's hands never paused in their work. "That's why we're leaving." The evacuation began immediately. Every human aboard the sphere, plus several hundred alien prisoners who had been held alongside them, made their way to escape pods and emergency shuttles. Kane's ship served as a coordination point, its advanced sensors guiding rescue vessels through the chaos. With 30 minutes remaining until the Genesis Array fired, Kane made his final modifications to the targeting system. The weapon would discharge directly into the sphere's power core, creating a chain reaction that would vaporize the entire facility. "You're insane," Vexthai said. "This sphere represents the pinnacle of hegemony military technology. Its destruction will set our research back decades." Kane looked directly into the alien's multiple eyes. "Good." The evacuation reached its final phase with 10 minutes remaining. Kane's ship and dozens of escape vessels began moving away from the sphere at maximum velocity, carrying nearly 5,000 rescued prisoners toward safety. Kane remained aboard until the last possible moment, ensuring that every human had been evacuated and that his targeting modifications couldn't be reversed. When he finally reached his ship's docking bay, the Genesis Array had less than 2 minutes remaining in its firing sequence. As Kane's vessel accelerated away from the sphere, he watched through the ship's sensors as the weapon reached full charge. The Genesis Array fired exactly as programmed, but instead of striking the target planet, its massive energy discharge tore directly into the Judgment Sphere's core. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. The hegemony's most advanced military installation simply ceased to exist, taking with it their research data, their biological weapons programs, and their primary coordination center for anti-human operations. In the aftermath, as rescue ships collected survivors and the galaxy absorbed news of the sphere's destruction, Marcus Kane found himself sitting in his ship's observation deck, surrounded by freed prisoners who were slowly coming to terms with their rescue. Sergeant Major Walsh approached him, still wearing the tattered remains of her Marine uniform, but standing with the bearing of a soldier who had never truly surrendered. "What happens now?" she asked. Kane looked out at the stars, thinking about the war that was still raging, the colonies that still needed protection, and the enemies who would undoubtedly seek revenge for what had happened here. Now we go home, he said, and we make sure this never happens again. The galaxy's most dangerous force had struck its decisive blow. The hegemony's plan for human genocide lay in ruins, their most advanced facility was debris, and their confidence in their own superiority had been shattered beyond repair. But Marcus Kane knew the war wasn't over. It might never be over, as long as there were beings in the galaxy willing to commit genocide for the sake of their own power. That was acceptable. Kane had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. He was exactly where he belonged, standing between the innocent and those who would harm them, armed with human determination and alien technology, ready to remind anyone who forgot that humanity's greatest strength had always been its refusal to surrender. The Ghost of Titan Station had become something more than a legend. He had become hope itself, proof that even the smallest force could change the galaxy if it was willing to pay the price. And Marcus Kane was always willing to pay the price.